Welcome to my studio. Today we are going to paint this beautiful landscape in acrylic. At the same time, we are going to learn the entire process of painting step by step. So let's jump into the painting. For this particular painting, I am going to use this 20 by 14 inch 10 ounce canvas board, and this is my today's color palette, which is containing 8 colors, 1 white and 1 gray. So let's get started. For my initial block-in, I'm starting with the color Paynes Gray and Ultramarine Blue and creating a very dark tone. Let's give it a touch of yellow ochre and let's jump into the painting. This is going to be the first layer of the painting, and I'm using a very spontaneous and broad brush strokes. We just need to give the suggestion of the things. We don't have to be precise about anything. In this stage, the whole concentration should be on the composition. Here you can see I am painting the entire mass of the composition. This is called the block-in. In each and every step I am going to do the block-in. At the initial stage, the block-in shapes will be a little bit bigger, and towards the end the block-in shapes will be a little bit smaller gradually. You can see now only I am visualizing all the trees, stones and all the different shapes, but as big blocks of paints, not in detail. For this, fan brush can be used because fan brush can give broad brush strokes as well as it can create a thin layer of paint. Here I have started putting some darks in the block-in itself. The canvas is still wet because from this layer I am not expecting any sharp edges. So if I paint wet on wet, automatically it will be blended with the background. Giving more darks and more suggestions here and there. Alright, there is a time lapse. I gave approximately half an hour to let the paint dry, and I also cleaned my palette because I was using very diluted paint, and from this stage I am going to use very opaque paints. So first of all I am deciding the light source of this painting, and for this I am using cadmium yellow and titanium white. So let's establish the light. You can see I am giving a crisscross brush strokes for this. You can see I am also painting over the previous block-in, but still some of the areas it is showing through the yellow layer, and this is what I wanted. Now it's time to paint some blue sky. For this I have used a mixture of cobalt blue and ultramarine blue with titanium white. The yellow paint layer is still wet, and that is the reason I am trying to blend my blue with the yellow. Now let's paint this side of the painting. Let's add a little bit crimson to this mixture. The left hand side sky is going away from the light source, so it should look much more cooler than the right hand side. And this is the reason I have added crimson to this mixture. You can see this side also I am painting over my block-in. Now let's take titanium white to make the light source a little bit brighter. So this area of this painting will get the brightest value. Alright, now let's mix a very cool color, and for that I am using ultramarine blue, a touch of yellow ochre, a touch of crimson, and to make it bright, titanium white. Let's add a little bit more crimson. And now I am going to do the block-in of the distant mountain. It will be barely visible through the trees, but we have to paint it as the background layer. So it is also showing through the gap of the trees. Again, we don't have to be very precise because later on we are going to paint over it. Alright, now let's add little bit Payne's grey and ultramarine blue to make the mixture a little bit darker. Now I am going to paint some background trees. You can see how I am holding the flat brush vertically to create the pattern of those trees. Now let's make the mixture a little more darker by adding ultramarine blue and Payne's grey. You can see I am using the same mixture from the beginning and just making it a little bit darker or a little bit lighter. So I'm making the bottom part a little bit more darker. Adding a little bit yellow ochre to it to give the sense of the green. Because we know blue and yellow, two primary color, after mixing will create green. Alright, now this is the time to work for the midground. And for that, I am taking ultramarine blue, Payne's grey, yellow ochre in a small fan brush and also adding a little bit titanium white to create a kind of grey color. Here I have started doing the block-in of the midground trees. And you can see how with the fan brush I am creating the pattern of the midground tree leaves. First of all, I am checking the placement of the tree and then only I am creating the pattern of the tree leaves. Again, it has to be very random, and still you can see I am not concentrating on individual trees because I am trying to place the entire midground tree mass. According to my plan, I am going to paint these trees in 3 different layers. So the first layer I am painting right now will be the dark paint layer. Second layer will be the mid-tone layer, and the third layer will be the highlight layer. And I will try to create the volume of individual trees by using these 3 different layers. Now let's concentrate creating these patterns. It has to be very random because nature itself is very random. You cannot predict a particular part of the nature. Each stone is different, each tree is different. So whatever we are going to paint from the nature has to be very random. Some of you have asked if I am using a photographic reference. Yes, I am using photographic reference because intuitional paintings will be different than the figurative paintings. So I always will recommend for the figurative painting, if the real scenery is there in front of your eyes, that can be the best condition of the painting. If it is not there, we can capture that particular moment in our camera and later on we can paint it in our studio. Most of the time I prefer to paint such sceneries which I personally experienced. But sometimes when I am going through some photographs from other photographers and I'm becoming inspired out of it. Sometimes I try to paint those photographs also. You can see I'm doing the same thing again and again, but each time the height of the trees and the leaves pattern are different. Mixing a little bit white to this mixture, and I am also giving the sense of the background trees. So in the midground also I am creating two layers, background and foreground. The background trees are relatively lighter and the foreground trees relatively darker. So in between giving the hints of some background trees, over here you can notice that the trees are far from the camera. I painted very small, and the trees are very close to the camera. I painted the trees larger, and this is because of the perspective. So if we are maintaining this, automatically our drawing will look correct, and in the whole composition perspective will be there. Now let's make this bottom part a little bit darker. Alright, now let's take a liner brush, and I'm using the same mixture and will draw some of the branches. Not everywhere, but maybe from here and there the stem is visible. Now I am giving the suggestion of the branches. Alright, going back to my fan brush once again and preparing the same mixture by using Payne's Grey, Ultramarine Blue and Yellow Ochre. And this time I am doing the blocking of the trees for the right hand side midground. You can see in this area also I am just giving the suggestion of the trees because those are very far from the camera. Now making the mixture a little bit darker, but the colors I was using, I am keeping the same colors. And now I am painting the bottom part of the trees. Because it is not getting the direct sunlight, it has to be a little more dark than the top part of the trees. Now I am planning to paint another layer of trees at the background. And definitely it has to be a little more darker than the background color. You have noticed so far that for all the trees I am using the same color mixture, but still through the values I am trying to create depth in my painting. Alright, now it's time to paint some light over there, and for that I am mixing titanium white, cad yellow medium and lemon yellow. At the very beginning we decided our light source, and accordingly the light rays are hitting from the back of the tree shapes. And that is the reason I am trying to create the rim light at the edges of the tree shapes. And now let's paint some light rays. So from the source I am giving the direction of the light rays through the brush strokes. So through each and every trees the light rays will be visible in this area. I'm also giving the suggestion of light pockets in that area. Let's switch to the linear brush, and I'm drawing a tree stem in that area. And let's draw the tree pattern once again in the right hand side trees. If you have observed outdoor, the trees will appear big mass of light greens, dark greens, somewhere browns, oranges. Barely you can see the individual leaves of the trees, or we notice the individual leaves of the trees. So while painting also, we should paint the trees as big masses of colors. So for this also, let's give the suggestion of the tree stem, and now let's paint the leaves patterns. Now let's create another tree in this area, which is not wholly visible. This tree, I am assuming, is in a little bit foreground. We just need to be spontaneous without worrying about anything. There is a slight value difference between these trees. This particular tree, I am making it a little bit more darker than the previous two trees because it is in the foreground, and it should have more contrast than those trees. Now let's add a little bit titanium white to make the mixture a little bit brighter, and let's paint the negative areas showing through the trees. I also have added a little bit viridian in this mixture to make it a little bit more greenish. Switching back to my liner brush, and let's draw some stems over here. I'm just drawing with my brush, and for each and every stem I'm designing it differently, if you have noticed. These are all background trees, so I'm not going to do any detailing right now on it, only positioning the trees. Alright, in between I clean my palette partially, and this time let's start with viridian. Mixing a little bit cadmium yellow to it, also giving a touch of crimson lake. I'm basically trying to create a kind of olive color, and it has to be mid-tone. Adding more yellow to it, and let's add a little bit more titanium white to make the mixture a little bit lighter. And let's start painting the mid-tone. For this I am using a number 6 filbert brush, and you can see just by using the tip of it I am trying to create the leafy pattern. I personally found filbert brush can be very useful to paint some of the tree leaves. So this is the mid-tone right now I am painting over the dark layer. One thing to remember in this layer that we should not cover the entire dark layer. The dark shadows should be visible from here and there. Don't expect a finished piece of artwork from the beginning. Then very easily you will get demotivated. We should wait till the end of the painting. It is like a small plant. From the beginning we cannot expect flowers and fruits from the plant. We need to give it a little time to grow up. Then suddenly one day, without our expectation, we'll get surprise of beautiful flowers. So in painting also, at the very initial stage, don't expect anything out of it. Just by analyzing it and doing it, you will see the entire space is there in front of you. So over here, let's create harmony of different colors. And for this, I added Crimson Lake to this mixture. And you can see it has become a kind of orange and reddish color. For the distant trees, the tree pattern has to be smaller, and the trees closer to the camera, the tree pattern has to be a little bit bigger. In this I am trying to paint the branches which are getting light from the light source. That also I am not using any highlight in the trees. I am painting only the mid-tone throughout the mid-ground. Like this we should paint one by one, resisting our temptation to finish the painting. If you carefully notice the color mixture for the trees, you can see there is not a single color, but there are multiple colors. Some part of it is towards the green and some part of it is towards the red. And while taking the colors, sometimes I am taking from the red side and sometimes I am taking from the green side. And that's how I am getting the harmony of greens and reds in the mid-tone. So you can see I'm just giving the suggestion of the green leaves here and there. I am not overpainting with the mid-tone. I just left some of the dark layer which is visible through the mid-tone. Alright, now for this side also, let's add a couple of stems and branches here and there. With the branches also, we should not overdo it. You can see some of the areas I overlap the branches over the mid-tone, and some of the mid-tones I just kept like that only. Mixing a little bit more color because in the left hand side I am filling to paint a few more leaves. There is no hard and fast rule that you should use filbert brush only for creating these leaves. You can use a small fan brush also, you can use a flat brush also, you can use a notch brush also. So it's about a preference. Alright, now going back to my palette and taking Cad Yellow Medium and Crimson Lake with a touch of Titanium White. This time I have mixed a bright color because I am going to paint the background trees in the right hand side of my composition. Our light source is at the right hand side of my composition, and all the trees will stand in a backlighting condition. As I discussed previously, because the subsurface scattering property of the tree leaves, some leaves will appear very bright because it will absorb some amount of light and then will scatter back. So I am trying to give the hints of those background trees. So if you analyze carefully, the left hand side lighting condition and the right hand side of my composition, the lighting condition is totally different. The left hand side trees are getting the light at the right edges of the trees, but in the right hand side trees, the light is at the back. Through the rapid brush strokes, I am trying to give the suggestion of the background tree leaves. Sometimes it is overlapping the midground trees also, but we should not be worried for that because anytime I can come back to the midground trees and can re-establish the dark pattern of it. So this time, mixing the dark with Viridian and Crimson Lake, I have experienced that Viridian and Crimson Lake, these two complementary colors, can create beautiful dark color. So re-establishing the shadow pattern for these mid-ground trees. Alright, as you can see, we have done with the mid-tone of the mid-ground. Now let's mix the color for the highlight. And for that I am mixing Caddy Aluminium with Titanium White, touch of Crimson Lake. And let's get started painting with the highlight. As we discussed previously, the light is coming from the right hand side. For the left hand side trees, I am painting only the right hand side edges of the trees. Only the touch of the highlight here and there. I am not covering the entire mid-ground leaves. So in each and every steps, we just need to analyze and paint. Then everything is going to be alright. If you are painting by analyzing the light, then most of the cases there will be a chance of successful painting. So like this, I will move forward, and over here I will just speed up the process a little bit. Now for this side also, I am giving the suggestion of the highlights. That's fine, we are almost done with the highlights. Now it's time to block in the foreground, and for that I am mixing a dark color by using Paris Grey, Ultramarine Blue and Crimson Lake. As the midground layer, for the foreground also, first I am painting the entire mass of it, and then later on I will move to the smaller shapes. I personally enjoy painting this layer because with a very confident brush strokes, you can do the modeling of a particular object. So once again, this layer is for the placement of the objects. There should not be any detailing, rather you should not think of any detailing while painting this layer. You can be so spontaneous and you can have freedom to paint this particular layer. I discussed the importance of this layer previously. This layer is responsible for the composition. If this layer is correct in terms of composition, then all the other layers and the detailing will look correct. But if this layer is looking problematic, then rest of the part will look problematic. So while painting this layer very spontaneously, we should be very careful that our composition is correct. Alright, now let's do the blocking of the water surface. And for this, I am using cadmium yellow, viridian, and a touch of crimson lake. Also mixing titanium white. And let's paint the water surface. I'm just analyzing the reflection of the trees on the surface and how the dark reflection will be created on the water surface. You can paint this very rapidly. We don't have to be worried that we are overlapping some of the stones or something like that, but your strokes have to be very spontaneous. You can see I have painted some of the stones also with the same color, and this is going to create a harmony between the objects. Now I am mixing a kind of grey color for the water surface. Now let's paint with this. Alright, now it's time to do the blocking of some smaller stones at a distance, and for that I am mixing a dark value by using Paynes Grey, Ultramarine Blue, Crimson Lake, and a little bit of yellow ochre. Now very quickly I'll just give the suggestion of the stones. So at the beginning, with the dark paint, I am actually drawing the objects. Simultaneously, I am using these two brushes. So this particular brush I am using to refine the shapes a little bit. In acrylic painting, you will not be able to keep your brushes wet for long, but in a short interval, two brushes can be used simultaneously, like this, how we do it in oil painting. a few more stones in this area. Some of the areas the light is flooded and I'm giving the suggestion of that. Once again coming back to my dark brush and creating some more stones in this area. Alright, now let's mix the mid-tone for the stones, and for that I am using titanium white, a touch of crimson lake, yellow ochre, cobalt blue, and a touch of cadmium yellow medium. And now let's paint the mid-tone of the stones. You can see I'm defining the area that is getting light. So each stone I'm dividing into two shapes. One is the shadow shape, one is the light shape. And this is how we are painting the light also, and we are retaining the shadow also. But we have to be careful where exactly to put the shadow plane. So the stones facing towards the light should have the light planes, and just the opposite side should have the shadow plane. That's fine. Now let's add a couple of more stones in the mid-ground. Now once again let's put the light planes. You can see I'm switching between my dark brush and the light brush, so that you don't have to mix the color again and again. Alright, as you can see I have changed my mind in this area, and instead of painting some hanging branches, right now I'm thinking of painting the entire foreground tree. I'm starting with some bright leaves in this area, and for that I'm using a mixture of cadmium yellow medium and titanium white. And you can see with a fan brush I'm trying to create the pattern of the leaves in this area. Over here also I'm going to work layer wise. So from the brightest tone I will go gradually to the darkest tone. Because once again I already have described this is a backlighting condition. So the background leaves will be much more brighter than the foreground leaves. I have added a little bit yellow ochre and crimson lake with the same mixture to get this particular color. You can see very spontaneously, just by using the brush strokes, I am creating those patterns. Now this time giving the hints of some individual leaves, and for this I am using a studio made notch brush. I just made this particular brush in my studio itself. Now laying down even a darker tone. So in the same mixture, I have added a little bit of ultramarine blue. Because I am using the same mixture and same brush, you can see from a dark tone gradually I am getting a kind of gradation. So once again, to remember not to cover entirely the previous layer. Now giving the suggestion of some very narrow branches. And you can see like the leaves, those branches are also getting bright rays, so becoming very bright in color. Alright, now let's add the stem of the tree. This has to be definitely darker in tone because of the backlighting condition, and definitely it is not translucent like the leaves. This is the same dark mixture I was using previously, only I am using a little more yellow ochre to it. Now switching to the rigger brush. You can see through rigger brush you can give thick and thin lines, and how I am overlapping the small branches over the big stems. And the beauty of rigger brush is because of the long bristles of it, it can also hold a lots of paint in it. I am drawing the branches in different directions to create some interesting patterns. Now in the bright side, just against the light source, the narrow branches also will appear a little bit brighter. So trying to give the suggestion of it. At the same time, the saturation of these branches will be a little bit more than the rest. Now let's paint the negative areas to establish the shape of the tree stems a little better. I am using the same bright background color for this, and over here you can see I am giving the suggestion of the sun rays coming through these tree stems. That's fine. Now let's paint the foreground leaves. This will be very dark because the foreground leaves are getting very less light than the background leaves, so it will appear very dark. For this also I am using the same mixture, only added a little bit more ultramarine blue and viridian to it. So you can see we are getting the suggestion of some foreground leaves against the bright sunlight. That's fine. Now let's add another layer of leaves. And this layer is necessary because of the bounce light of the sky. In this case also I am using the same mixture, only added a little bit more cobalt blue and titanium white to it. Because it is getting the cool bounce light from the sky, this layer will appear much more cooler than the previous layers. Alright, this is fine. Now it's time to re-establish the light. For this, I'm mixing cad yellow medium, lemon yellow with titanium white. Once again adding some plants at the bottom of the tree which are getting bounce light from the sky. Now let's add a couple of branches which are getting bounce light and appearing very bright against the dark leaves. Alright, now let's add the rim light for the tree stems. And for this I am using titanium white, lemon yellow and cadmium yellow. So just giving the suggestion here and there. Alright, now let's do the blocking of the foreground. This is the time to distinguish some of the stones. So at this moment I am thinking of the light and shadow pattern only. And here and there, as you can see, I am painting the mid-tone for the individual objects. So some of the areas getting the direct sunlight I am painting with the warm yellow color. And some of the areas I am also painting with the local color of the stone, and some of the areas I am painting the bounce light. So the areas not getting the direct sunlight should be illuminated by the cool bounce light. So by analyzing all these three conditions, I am trying to create a harmony between the colors. The final goal is to exaggerate the areas where sun rays are hitting, and here is the secret. The areas the sun rays will hit will become much more warmer than the others. So the base color, if we can make a little bit cooler, automatically the brighter side will look much more warmer than the cool shadows. So that is the reason the mid-tone I created much more cooler. So automatically I will be able to exaggerate the lights. Now re-establishing the dark shadows and dividing the space into smaller shapes. Alright, now let's give the hints of some foliage. So once again I am starting with the darks, and for this I am using the same fan brush to create some patterns like grasses. Now giving the touch of a brighter mid-tone here and there. I'm just trying to create the original hue of the foliage so that it will look a little bit more chromatic. You can see this time I'm getting a totally different pattern out of the fan brush, and I'm really enjoying working with it. Now similarly adding the bounce light on it, and finally I am going to add the highlights on it. In my experience, after a certain point of the painting, you will feel like you have entered in the space of the painting, and that's a beautiful feeling altogether. Now this is the time to add the highlights. So I am just assuming the direction of the light rays and accordingly giving the highlights on the foliage. So in this area, the sun is trying to find the gaps between the leaves and trying to flood its light. So small touches here and there. Also giving the suggestion of some small plants which are getting bounce light only. You can see I am not painting everywhere but just giving the suggestions here and there. Now some leaves are reflecting back the bounce lights directly to the viewer's eye, and those leaves will appear a little bit more brighter than the others, and I'm just trying to give the suggestion of that. Also you can see how it is coming towards the viewers. It is becoming brighter and brighter. Once again, let's give some more highlights. So behind this stone, some of the leaves are getting the touch of the sun rays from some small gap. Over here, just giving the suggestion of some foreground grasses. Some more highlights in this area until unless you are satisfied enough. Now let's make this area more harmonious and giving the suggestion of some flowers. You can see I'm using different colors in it. So after a certain point, the hue will not matter a lot if your value is correct. Alright, now let's do the blocking of these stones. Once again, I'm going to repeat the same process. So my first job is to convert the shapes into two parts, the light part and the shadow part. Shadows we already have created. Now let's paint the light part. So I am emphasizing the areas getting the direct light and the areas which are there in the penumbra of those light rays. Also, I am using the green color over here as a mid-tone just to give the suggestion of the moss on those stones. Previously, I painted these stones as one big object. Now this is the time during blocking I am converting that bigger shape into smaller shapes. Alright, now it's time to add some original color of the stones. And you can see I have mixed a kind of light brown color and I am adding to each of the stones. But while doing it, I am retaining the shadow shapes. That's fine. Now I am re-establishing the darkest dark. Still, the blocking is going on, and that is the reason with some limited brush strokes I am trying to get the appearance of the objects. In your painting, there should be a combination of smaller as well as bigger brushstrokes. Then the entire painting will look harmonious. In the shadows also you can see I have used both cool and warm colors. And another thing you can notice, I have kept some definite edges, which is also very necessary for a successful painting. Once again, working with the mid-tone and defining some smaller shapes. That's fine. Now let's create a little bit room for the water body in this particular area. So in this, you can understand I'm working with the positive and negative shapes together. Now continuing with my midtones. You can see gradually I'm getting more stones, so with some brush strokes you can model the objects, and this is why blocking is so powerful. So simultaneously I'm working with my darks and mid-tones for the blocking. Now started adding some bounce lights. That is fine. Now this is the time to re-establish the light shapes. And for this I am using cadmium yellow medium, yellow ochre mixed with titanium white. Let's switch to a smaller brush because I am going to divide the shapes even more smaller shapes. So now I have started concentrating on smaller stones. You can see I am still refining the light shapes. As I discussed earlier, a part of the stones is covered by the green moss, and over here you can see I am trying to create the impression of that. Now let's paint some grasses. Over here I am using a liner brush for this. Now using a fan brush to make it a little bit blurry, as I discussed earlier that everything should not be perfectly detailed. So through the fan brush, now just giving the impression of it. And here also a part of the grass is getting the direct sunlight and a part of it is in the bounce light itself. So for the areas getting the direct sunlight, I am using the color lemon yellow and viridian, and that's how it is looking so bright. And the areas in the shadow, I am using a cooler version of it because it is getting the cooler bounce light. So I have added cobalt blue and a little bit more titanium white to it. Now it's time to add some darkest dark, and you can see I am working with much more smaller areas, and that's why I am using a number 6 filbert brush. Now once again coming back to refine the light shapes, and this is how I'll move forward with the darkest dark and the light areas. There is a plane change in this area, so I have added cobalt blue to it. Now coming back to the light shapes. Over here you can see simultaneously I'm using two brushes, one for the light shapes, one for the shadow shapes, and this will make your process a little bit faster. So if you have noticed carefully, I am painting the positive areas with the light tone, and after that I am refining that positive area by painting with the darks in the negative areas, and that's how I am getting the form of the stones. So I am just defining the individual planes for the modeling of the stones, and with some very limited brush strokes we are getting the volume of it. See, creating new planes in the previously given dark patches, and those dark shapes are converting into stones. I'm visualizing these stones into small planes, and that's what I'm painting. Alright, now let's concentrate on the smaller stones. First of all, I am emphasizing the darks. That means once again I am converting the shapes into two parts, light and shadow part. And here and there I am also adding a kind of cool mid-tone where I am thinking there is a plane change. When we are working with a photographic reference, there can be numerous information in it. But as an artist, you need to decide which part to take and which part to reject. And this is a very crucial decision. At the very beginning of our painting practice, it is a general tendency to paint everything, all the information we see in front of us. But according to your composition, we need to decide what are the elements you should paint and what are the elements you should reject. Over here, I am doing the blocking of the stones and I'm just trying to make each and every stone different. That's fine, now let's paint the reflection on the water. I have painted some dark background trees, so giving the impression of that on the water surface. Maybe at the right hand side some big tree shape is there and it is creating this dark shadow shape on the water. Now let's paint the reflected light shapes on it. If the water surface is very still, we can get sharp reflection. If water surface is having a movement, the reflection will be very blurry. So in this case, it is a moving water, so the reflection has to be very blurry. You can see I am coming to the smaller areas and giving the reflection of the stones also. Alright, now let's add some local colors to the stones because I can see some stones are still remaining. So creating the light shapes in those stones. So giving the suggestion of the light shapes here and there. You can see by adding cool and warm colors, I'm trying to create color harmony in the stones. Now it's time to paint the sky reflection on the water surface, and at the same time showing some movement of the stream. Because this is a process of repetition, I will fast forward this process a little bit. In the movement of the water surface, the stones are obstacles. But it doesn't stop. It creates its own way and moves forward. When we are sitting beside a river or a water stream, we can hear and feel the movement of the water surface. But in a painting, we are having the only opportunity to capture a particular moment. And in that only, you have to show the movement and the energy. Alright, now let's paint the tiny ripples by using the same color mixture. For this, I was using ultramarine blue, titanium white, and a touch of crimson lake. So here I am just giving some touches here and there, very randomly. Alright, now it's time to add the highlights of the stones. And for this I am using the mixture of cad yellow medium, lemon yellow, a touch of viridian, and titanium white. So these are the areas where the direct sun rays are hitting. In this stage, I am refining the shapes even more. I am giving the impression of the direct sunlight as well as refining some hard edges. You have noticed the left-hand side corner of this painting, I didn't add too much of detailing, and deliberately I am keeping this area like this because the reason already we have discussed, the entire painting should not have the similar amount of detailing. Let's create the shadow of that stone on this surface, making it a little bit cooler. Alright, now this is the time to add some sharp specular highlight on the stones. And for this I am using this rigger brush, which can hold a little bit paint also and can create very narrow brush strokes also. You can notice with these brush strokes also, I am giving some tiny detailing and I am dividing the planes even more. Alright, for the smaller stones also I have to do the same, so let's speed up the process a little bit. Okay, now let's paint some grasses which are getting direct sunlight. So it will appear very bright in value, and I'm using the same mixture for this also. So from some corners of the stones, the grasses are coming out. Alright, now let's make the sky reflection a little more prominent, using the same mixture of ultramarine blue, titanium white and a touch of crimson lake. So now this is the time to paint the brightest highlight, and for this I am using this liner brush, and this time I am using titanium white directly. So the connecting areas of the stone and the water surface I am giving this line. If you have noticed very carefully, that connecting area, because of the threshold of the water surface, will create a very tiny plane, and that plane, because of the specular highlight, will be very much illuminated by the light. It can be direct light or it can be indirect light, but it will be very much illuminated. On the water surface also giving some information. Because of the tiny ripples, those highlights will be created. We are towards the end of this painting. You can see in this area I am giving the direction of the water movement. Giving the information of the movements of the water, where because of the stones, water surface is creating ripples. So around it, we can see these kinds of highlights. Also, some of the portion of the water surface is getting direct sunlight, and that part also will look very much illuminated. So I am trying to give the suggestion of it. Another thing to discuss, in the entire water surface, the water flow should not be the same. Somewhere the water flow will be more and somewhere the water flow will be less. Accordingly, we need to paint, and then only it will look harmonious. Okay, now let's add some direct highlights to the stones. This highlight is for the direct light. So painting the corners of it because the sun is there in that side. Alright, now let's add some suggestions of the direct highlight for the background trees. Okay, we are at the final stage of the painting. Now let's create the sun. So I am painting by using titanium white directly by using a hog brush. Here I am making a circular shape. Now using a wooden scale to paint the rays of it, and for this I have switched to my flat brush. So like this I am painting rest of the rays. Alright, this is looking fine. Now taking the bright yellow color and painting over it at the end of the light rays. Now let's exaggerate the bright white at the center. And that's all. We are done with this painting. So this is it for today. Hope you enjoyed today's session. If you want to check the other landscape painting video tutorials, the links are given in the description. You can check it out. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel because many more painting video tutorials are coming in future. Thank you very much for watching.